I read quite a lot of books in 2025, but out of all of the books that I read, these are the top 10. These are the ones that I just couldn't stop thinking about, the ones that made me cry, the ones that absolutely frightened me, and the ones that made me feel incredibly seen. Hello everyone, it's Aisling and welcome to the big one, the final video of 2025, where I talk about my top 10 reads of the year. We have a bit of space romance, a bit of Irish horror, Roman inspired fantasy, and a few nuns. Grab a tea or another hot drink, get comfy, and let's count down to the very top spot of 2025. So let's get started. At number 10 is a book that I expect will be on a lot of these videos, and I had to have it on here myself. So number 10 is, of course, Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book completely and utterly swept me off. It is very typical Taylor Jenkins Reid. It's emotionally sharp, transportive, and anchored by a really strong and independent and smart woman. It's set during the height of the 1980s space shuttle program, and this one captures the awe of space exploration and the very human stories that are unfolding there behind the scenes. Our protagonist, Joan Goodwin, is an incredibly driven young woman, and I really enjoyed following her transformation from a grounded academic to someone daring enough to reach beyond the stratosphere, both literally and emotionally. The supporting cast is incredibly vivid, especially Vanessa Ford, whose dynamic with Joan really created layers of tension and tenderness. Taylor Jenkins Reid really has a way of blending history and fiction in a way that feels incredibly seamless, and the atmosphere, pun intended, of this novel is really full of grit, pressure, longing, and possibility. The emotional payoff of this one hits really hard without veering too much into melodrama. This is certainly not a perfect story, but still this is an incredibly bold and beautifully told story about love and ambition and friendship. It didn't quite reach 5-star heights for me, but it did come very close. It's cinematic, it's emotional, and if you want a book that feels like reading a blockbuster film, this is it. And then at number 9, a debut that ended up really surprising me. I did not expect this book to be on my top 10 when I picked it up, but it has to be here. I'm talking about an Irish novel. It is called Ordinary Saints, written by Niamh Ní Mhaolón. We follow a young queer Irish woman who is living in London now, away from where she was born and raised in Ireland. It's got a bit of a slightly bizarre setup in that our protagonist's deceased brother is in the process of potentially being canonized after his death, and while our protagonist has left her religion behind, she still feels herself constantly drawn back into aspects of organized religion's oftentimes strange and incredibly arbitrary rules. For some reason I expected this one to be a bit of a silly read, but it is absolutely just such a good book. I felt really well represented as a young Irish person who's been raised within Catholic traditions and within Catholic schools, but feels at best really just quite apathetic about the whole thing. It's really well written. The prose is pinpoint sharp. It's lyrical, it's deeply reflective, and really made me pause and think about my own relationship, or lack thereof, with religion and with the contradictions within organised religion as well. While I did find it a really intimate and lyrical read, it also felt incredibly fresh and wonderfully new. It's quite funny in parts as well, which I wasn't expecting. It captures that really specifically Irish experience of how messy families can be when faith and identity collide. This is a quiet gem. And then number 8 is a quiet meditative read by way of Australia from author Charlotte Wood, and that is Stoneyard Devotional. This is one of those quiet books that just lingers. It's really, to me, felt like such a rich and rewarding read. So we follow a woman who leaves behind her whole life and goes and retreats to a convent full of nuns, but our protagonist is not there as a nun. She's there as this sort of in-between figure. She's helping out and observing and almost haunting the place. And that sort of in-betweenness kind of really defines this whole novel. It's slow and really internal and wrestles with themes of grief and guilt, and the shape of a life that doesn't quite fit neatly into any sort of box. Wood's writing is really sparse but also really sharp, and every sentence just feels entirely considered. There's this quiet tension beneath the surface, especially as memories from the narrator's past begin to surface a bit more. It's a book where not much really happens plot-wise, but emotionally there is a lot moving underneath the stillness of this one. It is very slow and introspective, so it's not going to be for everybody, but if you like quiet books that sit with you and don't offer any easy answers, then Stoneyard Devotional is definitely worth picking up, in my opinion. It's not a loud book by any means, but it's deeply spiritual without being preachy. If you like books with a lot of quiet introspection, this one might well be for you. Okay, so number 7 is a little bit of a cheat because it's a whole series, but it's my channel, so I'm gonna do what I want, and I am giving number 7 to the Hunger Games series by Suzanne Collins. So I revisited this whole series this year, and I read the 2 prequels that I had never actually read before. So I think at this stage we all know the story of Katniss and Panem, but rereading these books as an adult, the political commentary, the trauma, the critique of media spectacle, this had it all, and it hits really so much harder now given our current political landscape. Revisiting this series across all 5 books this year has really reminded me just how sharp, unsettling and emotionally effective that this series still is, even years after it was first written. What starts out as a fast-paced dystopian survival story becomes a much broader examination of power and propaganda and the cost of resistance, and it does so without ever losing its grip on the reader. Katniss really remains a compelling and deeply human protagonist. She's guarded, she's reactive and often uncomfortable in the role that she's forced to play. The original trilogy balances action with moral ambiguity particularly well, especially as the story moves away from the arena and into the messier realities of the rebellion. Mockingjay is probably still quite divisive, but I did appreciate its refusal to offer neat victories or easy heroism. The prequels add an extra layer of depth that really shift perspective in a way that reframes the entire series. They're slower and they're more political and just quietly disturbing. A study of how systems are built and how empathy is eroded. This series lands at number 7, not because it lacks impact, because I genuinely think this series is incredible, YA or not, but because its intensity and the bleakness can be incredibly heavy to sit with. Still, few YA dystopians have held up as well or have really influenced the genre as much as this one. It's thought-provoking, it's brutal, and also really surprisingly nuanced. The Hunger Games really deserves its place on this list. And then number 6 on my list is yet another quiet literary triumph. I'm talking about The Safe Keep by Wael van der Wouden. This book is pure tension. So we are set in the Netherlands in and around the 1960s. This novel is a real exploration of love and guilt and the long shadow of history. We follow Isabel, who is a cold and solitary young woman who lives in her late mother's home. Her life is disrupted by the arrival of her brother's girlfriend Eva, and this story delves into the complexities of their relationship. The prose is tender, lyrical, and captures the intimate nuances of Isabel and Eva's connection. The writing really immerses us as readers into a world that is really at once sweltering and suffocating, and it really reflects the intense emotions simmering beneath the surface of this novel. The atmosphere is incredibly evocative and draws you into the confined spaces of the house and the broader societal constraints of the time, particularly where women were concerned. Central to this story is a sapphic relationship during an era when these connections were worse than frowned upon and definitely shrouded in secrecy and shame. The portrayal of our main character's relationship is really tender and complex and expertly highlights the challenges that they face in a society that offers them really very little autonomy. We're set against the historical context of the Netherlands still grappling with the aftermath of World War II, which adds so many deeper layers onto this this story. I really genuinely love this book. It's so beautifully written and it's got this subtle complexity that I found to be masterful. This is another debut and it's incredible. It's a slow burning psychological story about repression, queer desire and the silent guilt of post-war Europe. The atmosphere of this one is thick enough to cut with a knife. And then number 5 is easily the most disturbing book on this list and probably the most disturbing book that I read all year. So don't go into this one lightly, but it absolutely earns its place on this list. I'm talking about Where I End by Sophie White. So this book is one of those ones that gets under your skin immediately. It's deeply unsettling, it's beautifully written, and it's absolutely saturated in atmosphere. Sophie White blends things like body horror and trauma and intergenerational damage in a way that feels both metaphorical but also brutally real. This story follows Elin, who is a young woman living on this isolated Irish island, and she lives with her mother, who is severely disabled and very dependent on her and her grandmother. When a new woman arrives on the island with her baby, Elin becomes fixated on them, and from there the tension really builds and builds. There's this constant sense that something is wrong even before you can name it. What really stood out to me about this book is how intimate the writing feels, even when the book becomes horrific, and it really does. The horror is always deeply tied to character and psychology. Nothing is gratuitous. It's more about the emotional rot that lies underneath the surface of this really isolated community and the way that desperation can absolutely twist a person. This is a book where you will need to check the trigger warnings. There's graphic body horror, there's child harm, there's abuse, there's trauma, the list goes on. It's a bleak novel, but it's so beautifully done, but it's not an easy read by any means. I found myself really appreciating the craft within this book, the atmosphere, the voice, the claustrophobic setting, the slow reveal of the truth. It's a book that really does reward readers that like literary horror, but it's literary horror that means something, and it's not just scares for the sake of entertainment. If you want something Irish and visceral and emotionally disturbing, but in a really thoughtful way, Where I End is an incredibly strong example of what modern horror can do. Just know what you're getting yourself in for if you do pick this one up. I think Sophie White is genuinely a genius from having written this book. It really explores the horrors of motherhood and isolation and care in a way that is stuck to me since I read this book. And number 4, then we're changing things up and we are going into a Roman inspired fantasy, The Will of the Many by James Islington. And actually, I didn't think that this book was going to make this list, but I'm reading The Strength of the Few, which is the sequel to this book at the moment, and I couldn't really remember this very well, so I had to go back and read an in-depth synopsis. And oh my god, this book definitely deserves a place on this list. When I think about the intricacies and what happens in here, this book was brilliant. It's a book that is really ambitious and immersive and relentlessly gripping. That said, it did take me about a quarter of the book to start to really enjoy it, but then it completely took over my brain. This book earns its number 4 spot by delivering both epic scope and intimate tension in a way that really feels meticulously crafted. The world building in this is dense without being overwhelming, and it draws heavily on Roman-inspired hierarchy, power and obedience. And the magic system is really compelling and unusual, and one that really stood out to me. The idea of power being drawn from submission and collective will is really unsettling in the best way, and it raises constant questions about ethics and morality, agency, sacrifice and control. Viz is an excellent central character. He's sharp, he's guarded, and he's driven by survival rather than by heroism. His internal conflict really mirrors the wider world perfectly, and the slow drip of revelations kept me turning pages long past when I meant to stop. The pacing is confident and it's deliberate and really well thought through, and this has a final act that genuinely left me so gripped. This is not a light or a cozy fantasy. It demands patience and time and attention, but the payoff is so worth it. It's thoughtful, intense and expertly plotted. The Will of the Many just felt like the beginning of something truly special. The magic system is so inventive, the dark academia setting is so brutal, and the plot twists, like, I genuinely gasped reading this book, and I'm so excited to be reading the sequel. I think it's definitely going to be up there as well. And now into the top 3, and take these rankings with a pinch of salt, because I just couldn't decide and changed my mind on my top 3 every few minutes, but As things stand, number 3 is another quiet literary novel. It is Ocean Vuong's newest, and it is The Emperor of Gladness. So in this one we follow Hai, who is a young Vietnamese boy, and he lives in America with his mother. And this book opens with Hai standing on a bridge contemplating jumping off when an elderly Lithuanian woman stops him and changes the course of his life. They ultimately end up moving in together, and this is such a great story about friendship that really spans the divide of age. They become fast friends, and their relationship is definitely one that I won't forget anytime soon. The writing in this, of course, is really lyrical and it's really fresh, but this one definitely does feel that bit more plot heavy than On Earth was, because I know that's a complaint that a lot of people had about On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. They found it maybe a little bit too abstract. Personally, I loved it, but if you're looking for something a bit more grounded from Vuong, then definitely try this one. Vuong does some really incredible things in this book with his storytelling, moving between different timelines and different points of view. And while it's heartbreaking, I think it's so important to say that this book is also really funny and really bizarre at times, and I didn't expect to laugh so much. This book has themes of grief, of addiction, of memory, regret, found family, immigration, racism, and education, and so much more. This book packs so much of a punch. It's heartbreaking but also really tender, and nobody can write like Vuong. I probably annotated half of this book as somebody who doesn't generally annotate. So good. And number 2 then is also another bit of a cheat. I'm going to mention a whole series, and this is a series that you've seen me talk about time and time again, and it's a series that has absolutely taken over my life. I've been reading it over the past 2 years and have one book left in this 16 book series. I am of course speaking of The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. This is the first book, Assassin's Apprentice, but just imagine I'm holding up 16 very chunky books here. Putting The Realm of the Elderlings in the number 2 spot almost seems a little bit unfair, not because it doesn't deserve the spot, but because I feel like this series really transcends ranking altogether. Spanning 16 books, this is one of the most emotionally immersive and devastating reading experiences I've ever had, and I still have one book to go. Robin Hobb's strength really lies within her characters, and nowhere is that more evident than within Fitz, probably our main character over the span of this entire series. Watching him grow and love and suffer and fail. He suffers and fails a lot, and he just endures across multiple trilogies, and it's so profoundly affecting. These books really take their time, like I mean really. They're almost glacial, but like in such a great way. They prioritize emotional truth over spectacle, and they really demand your patience and your time, but they do reward with such a depth of attachment that few authors can achieve. The world building in this series is subtle rather than flashy, and it unfolds through relationships, politics, and history rather than exposition. Magic in this world feels intimate and costly, tied closely to identity, to connection, and to loss. There have been moments in this series that have genuinely made me weep, and others that just felt so quietly and achingly beautiful. This is not a series that you can binge lightly or end up feeling untouched by. If you're willing to commit, The Realm of the Elderlings offers one of the most, and I mean the most, human fantasy experiences out there. It's storytelling that plays with you long after you've read it. It's a masterpiece of character work, and Hobb put these characters through the ringer, and you feel every single moment of it. It's devastating. It's beautiful. It's so intricately and carefully plotted. It only missed the top spot because I have not given one of these books 5 stars, but collectively the sum is so much greater than its parts. And then of course number 1 just felt uniquely personal to me, but these books are incredible. And here we are, all the way to number 1. This is my top, most favorite, best, highly rated 5-star book of 2025. Open Heaven by Seán Hewitt. Easily my favourite single book of 2025 so far. Open Heaven is tender and tremulous in a way that felt like it opened me up as I read. Seán Hewitt has genuinely written something that pulses with longing and yearning, not just romantic or sexual, but although that is certainly there, there's this quiet and deep yearning for beauty and escape and understanding. Yeah, it's a coming of age story, but it's also a really incredible portrait of desire in its rawest and most luminous form. James and Luke's relationship is a masterclass in emotional tension. Their every interaction hums with things unsaid, and Hewitt just manages to capture their breathless uncertainty of first love with such aching precision. The countryside setting is described so vividly, and it makes it feel like a character in and of itself. It's expansive, it's wild, and it's occasionally cruel. There's a real softness to the prose in this one that just broke me open again and again and again. And yet there's a real danger and darkness in here too. Moments that remind you how fragile queer youth can be, especially in such small and insular places. This book doesn't shout. It glows, it aches, and it lingers. It's a stunning debut that I will be pressing into people's hands for years. It's far from the biggest, loudest, or longest book of this year, but the prose is so lush and so poetic, and it captures that specific ache of yearning, of secrecy, and of first love so perfectly that it hurt. It's also about nature and memory and loneliness. It is a quiet and stunning piece of art that I know I will return to again and again throughout the rest of my life. So there we have it, my top 10 with a caveat books of 2025. What a year of reading this has been. Please do let me know in the comments below what filled your top spot in 2025. And then pals, just to say thank you so much for watching along with me this year, for your interactions, for your time and your patience with me. It doesn't go unnoticed, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here with me in 2025. And I'll chat to you next week in 2026. Take care pals, mind yourselves. Slán.